Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And today we are going to talk about ransomware. Well, we belong to the Azure cloud. That's our primary cloud that we talk about always. We discuss different aspect of Azure. So our examples will be from Azure. We will create multiple videos from Azure perspective on ransomware. But in this one, we have prepared some agenda that is, as you can see on the screen right now. Here is the agenda where we will try to explain what is ransomware first. Then we'll have the impact on environment when this attack happens. We'll try to find out the various entry points for ransomware and how assets are targeted. Then we'll go with prevention, detection, response, recovery, and continuous improvement of our environment. So, this is the agenda for this discussion. So, let's start with what is ransomware. Well, ransomware is a type of malicious software. We can also say malware that encrypts victims' files or entire systems, make them inaccessible until a ransom is paid to the attacker. So that's what the ransomware is. That's why this, because ransom is involved, that's why the name is also ransomware instead of malware. It's a malware to gain a ransom by encrypting the data. Okay. So once the ransom infects a device, it locks the user out of their data or system and typically displays a message demanding ransom or payment, often in cryptocurrency in exchange of their decryption keys. So ransomware typically exploit the weaknesses or vulnerabilities in your organization's IT systems or infrastructures to succeed. And the attacks are obvious that it does not take much investigation to confirm that your business has been attacked or that an incident should be declared. So that's the ransomware is, and those were the attack tactics. And any business or organization that operates an IT system with data in it can be attacked. We could say like this, right? So although individuals can be targeted in a ransomware attack, most attacks are targeted at business though, because it is related to the ransom and business has a lot of things to save, right? So, and they have lots of compliance to meet, lots of data that they should be taken care of. But it doesn't mean it will not attack. They will not attack the individual. They can. While the colonial ransomware attack of May 2021 drew considerable public attention, MS detection and response teams ransomware engagement data shows that the energy sector represents one of the most targeted sectors, along with the financial, healthcare, and entertainment sectors as well. And despite continuous promises not to attack hospitals or healthcare companies, of course, during a pandemic, healthcare remains the number one target of human operated ransomware. Right. So we could say not one industry is safe or exception for ransomware. So you need to prepare your environment as such that you can deal with such attacks. So let's take an example just to summarize what we talked about and make sense out of it. So a hypothetical company receives an email that appears to be from trusted vendor. The email contains a link labeled as an invoice, but when an employee clicks on it, they unknowingly download a ransomware payload. Within minutes, the ransomware encrypts the company's files and servers, displaying a message demanding payment, maybe in Bitcoin, to unlock the data. The company is now unable to access critical business data, causing downtime and potential financial loss or the reputation damage. So that's a little understanding of ransomware. And let's start with understanding the impact once this attack happens. So the very first thing is all important data could be encrypted, including files, databases, and systems, making them inaccessible. So data loss. Now the data is encrypted, so of course it will lead to the critical business operations halted due to inaccessibility of data that leads to the downtime. And organizations face substantial cost either by paying the ransom or through data recovery efforts that they need to go through, and it is downtime which is going on, so they're losing money because they're not earning anything, and they're losing money because either they are paying or decoding the data. There may be other kind of financial losses if they are managing some kind of compliance, so they have to go through those penalties as well. And finally, their reputation is on toss. Trust with customers and partners could be severely impacted, and which is very difficult to get back to the same reputation if even a single incident happens. All right, and finally, this breach, a breach which involves sensitive data, can lead to legal consequences as well. All right, so these are the impact on the environment, serious impacts because of the ransomware. That's the reason, or it also motivates us to prepare well first, preventing the ransomware, then because nobody can say like 100% is secure even if you have all kind of security tools. So we apply as much as prevention as we can, but we also have the detection and respond in place as well. We'll see all those things in this video. So this is the impact on environment. And now let's see from where exactly they enter in our system. Okay. These are some highlighted points. I just put it here. Phishing emails, which are deceptive tactic where attackers send mails that look legitimate but are designed to trick users into clicking malicious links or downloading infected attachments. And we know once clicked, the malware and ransomware is installed, compromising the system. So, what can we do about it? Well, we can conduct some awareness trainings, educate employees, use email filtering tools to block spam. We can implement MFA to prevent unauthorized access. We can deploy software that detects phishing attempts and flags them for users. Then malicious website or ads. That's the second point. Drive-by downloads occur when users visit a compromised website or see malicious ads without the user's knowledge. Ransomware is downloaded. That's the reason you see nowadays it is very strict, and you cannot browse anything, either inside the organization network or even outside if the device is managed by the organization. But still, there are people who don't know. There are people who are using their own device, things like that. Ultimately, what we can do about it, we should have the ad blockers or pop-up blockers, and you usually see that when you try to access something on your Google, or even when I do the LIC, it gives us the pop-ups to log in, and my organization's policies block the pop-ups. right? So we should have things like that: ad blockers, pop-up blockers. We should update the browsers and plugins regularly. We should use antivirus, anti-malware tools that scan and block malicious downloads. We should implement web filtering solutions that block access to known malicious sites. So these are a few things that we can do to stop the attacks from here. Now, we do have RDP attacks. Hackers target weak or unprotected RDP settings for sure, right? And why they do that? To gain unauthorized access to a system. And once they have the access, they install the ransomware. So RDP allows users to remotely control a computer, but it is not secured. Attackers can exploit it. So what can we do about it? The very first thing, disable the RDP when you not need it, or you should have MFA or strong passwords. You should restrict RDP access to only specific IP addresses or use VPNs to secure the connection. Use the PaaS services like Bastion, Azure Bastion to get into the VMs. And of course, regular monitor and log RDP connections to detect suspicious activities. Infected USB device is something which is the known reason to spread ransomware when a compromised USB is inserted into a computer. I know nowadays it is not there. You're not allowed to carry USB, and most of the USB ports are disabled in your organization. But still, it can impact. It can automatically execute and install malware or ransomware onto the systems because people work from their own laptop. People take their laptops, like office laptops, and work from outside the office premises. So things like that. So we have to be careful for USB devices. So what all can we do? What the very first thing is disable auto run for USB devices. Limit or block the use of USB devices in your organization, especially in the critical systems, and regularly scan USB devices if you're using with antivirus tools before accessing any contents. Use encryption for sensitive USB drives and whitelist trusted devices to ensure that only authorized USB devices can be connected. And of course, software vulnerabilities. Why? Because hackers exploit unpatched vulnerabilities in software and operating system to infiltrate system. And we have heard this thing many times, zero-day vulnerability, right? Because there is a vulnerability and it is open and everybody is aware of that. So the chances of getting compromised is very high. That's why we need to keep on patching the systems. Regular patching, we need to keep on scanning for the vulnerabilities through different vulnerability assessment tools. We should use endpoint protections like deploy endpoint protection solution, MS Defender. Application whitelisting is something very interesting. Only allow the approved and trusted applications to run. Then the final is supply chain attacks. So in supply chain attacks, ransomware can enter through third-party vendors or partners that have access to the systems. Attackers target a broader range of organization through compromised suppliers. So what can we do about it? The very first thing is assessment. Regularly assess the security practices of third party vendors and ensure they comply with your security standards. You do not just believe your vendor is all secure, and restrict the access. Least privilege principle is always there, so restrict the access vendors have to your systems, limiting it to only what is necessary. Implement monitoring tools to track vendor activities and detect any suspicious behavior. And of course, apply zero trust approach where all users, internal and external, must verify their identity and trustworthiness before accessing your network. So this is all about the entry points. And now let's see how assets are targeted. This is the entire thing from exposure to initial access to lateral movement and action after compromise. So think of attacker as a thieves trying to break into a building. First, they look for weakness like an unlocked door or a window. You could say that is the exposure. And once they are inside, they try to go unnoticed as they check out the building, which is your initial access. Then they move from room to room searching for valuables, that is your lateral movement. And finally, they grab what they want and just leave, causing damage on their way out, which is action after compromise. So let's talk about these. From the story of thief, we understood the entire chain. Now let's understand exposure. Exposure is the first stage where attackers look for the vulnerabilities in your system, reconnaissance, or applications that are visible to the internet. This could be the things like web server, API, or any service that's exposed to the public. Attackers scan for weaknesses such as misconfigurations, open ports, or unpatched software, things that we already talked about. For example, imagine you run a public facing application, but it is not properly secured, right? So attackers could find a way to exploit a weak point, such as an outdated software version to or any vulnerabilities there that you forgot to patch. So what we need to do, we need to uh, regularly perform vulnerability scans so that we ourselves are aware what we need to patch, and audits to identify and fix exposures. We should use WAF, which will protect you from OWASP, and you can have your own customized rules to protect public facing applications. And you should follow the secure coding practices because you are using a lot of libraries from here and there. Just like the vendor, you should not trust on the vendor that they are following the security standard. Similarly, all those libraries that you're using in your code, maybe one of the libraries is vulnerable, susceptible to the attacks. So anyways, they find their way in from the exposure, right? They find the weakest link and they try to access. So once attacker identify an exposed resource, they exploit that weakness to gain access to your environment. It may be cloud or on premises. These concepts apply to all the environment. This is the point where the attack begins. Attackers might use stolen credentials, find a misconfigured server, or exploit a valuable instance to infiltrate the system. And we can apply the same practice like MFA or regular audits or MS Defender to monitor suspicious activities, things like that. We will talk about all those in the same video where we were talking about detection, prevention, and response and things like that. But that's the initial access. Then once the attacker is there in the environment, then of course they will try to find the valuable, right? So what they will do, they'll try to move laterally and try to get the privileged access. So after gaining the initial access, attackers just don't stop there. They start moving laterally through your network, looking for more valuable data, resources, or sensitive credentials. They might access database, file systems, or even other cloud environments, whatever they can have their hands on, right? Especially they try to first get the privileged access and get the most valuable thing. All right, so lateral movement we can definitely stop or make it hard for the attacker through the segregation of networks using NSGs and firewall. All east and west, north and south network is scanned, filtered. Things like that will definitely help. And regularly monitoring and EDR, your endpoint detection and response solutions, quickly detect suspicious behaviors. So they will help you. Now, finally, once attackers have moved through your environment and gathered what they need, they take action. This could be stealing data, causing data loss, such as deleting or encrypting files, or launching further attacks like ransomware. The financial impact on organization can be huge. If the average cost of a data breach now, as per the estimate I've seen on MS Docs, is $1.23 million, right? So you can understand why it is most important to secure your environment. We are just talking about one single attack, that is ransomware, which is creating a lot of havoc here. But ultimately, there are thousands of attacks out there. Okay, but this is also part of our syllabus of SC series, so that's why this is something I would like to understand better and discuss with you guys. So let's start with the preventive measures. So to minimize the risk of a ransomware attack, these are some measures that we should bring in. The very first is identity and access management. You should have full clarity who is accessing your environment. There's a proper authentication and authorization in place. Zero tolerance. You should have the verified the identity, and only then you should give the access. You should have MFA in place that falls under IAM. You should have your PIM, just in time, just enough administration for your administrative privileges in place. You should apply the least principal privilege uh, management for providing access to anyone, whatever is necessary, only that, and if possible only that particular time limit when they are in the shift. For example, if there is a user admin who can change the password for your users, they should have the access to change the password for only that 8 hours of shift when they are inside the organization. Things like that. It would be very granular and very effective. You could also use the conditional access if you have the remote users, and set up conditional access to restrict access based on all those states like user location, if your device is not compliant, by which you are accessing the organization applications, and the risk levels which are mentioned. So accordingly. So identity and access management is something which is very, very important uh, with regards to any attack, specifically in ransomware, of course. Then network security. You must have the segregation and the filter control inbound and outbound traffic to your virtual machine or any other resource which are there for inbound traffic or the outbound traffic to limit the exposure to ransomware vectors. Must implement the firewall for monitor and controlling traffic, blocking known malicious IPs and domains. You could just create a more secure environment with a separate firewall for east and west and separate for north and south, right? So firewall. You must have a DDoS protection in place, which will help you protect against DDoS attacks, which may be precursor to ransomware, right? So do not just think because they are connected to each other, right? It's not like if this is all about downloading a software or malware. So uh, making the other aspect of the security, other layers of security has nothing to do with it. It's not like that. They are all connected to each other. So enable DDoS protection. And You perform the micro segmentation, segment networks to limit lateral movement by attackers, right? And implement zero trust network access solutions to control access to applications based on user identity, device health, and any other data or factors that you have. And of course, ensure all traffic, especially over public network, is encrypted. Then finally, data, because everything is all going around data. You should have your regular backups. Ensure all critical data is regularly backed up by using if Azure backup, let's say, with immutable storage, preventing modification by ransomware, right? So you can also protect storage accounts with the advanced threat protection, identifying and responding to anomalies, and encrypt all data at rest and in transit to prevent unauthorized accesses. Endpoint protection, you should, of course, have all those wonderful tools to defend yourself, right? So use Defender for Endpoint for all your Azure services to detect and respond to potential ransomware attacks, and ensure that all virtual machine application and systems are regularly patched and update to mitigate vulnerabilities which can be uh, compromised, right? Then ultimately it's the application which is running in the front, so you should have the very very secure deployment practices. You should incorporate security into the software development lifecycle with practices like code reviews and automated testing. And there are thousands of tools that you can implement to just check the vulnerability scanning at the very beginning. If you're using any third-party libraries or licenses, they will let you know then and there. And if you talk about application, that's a layer 7, and you should have WAF in place, web application firewall. Deploy WAF to protect web applications from common threats like SQL injection and cross-site scripting. And governance is something that you must have in the entire organization, which will take care of a lot of things by default, and visibility, which is the part of governance. We must have continuous monitoring tools in place like Microsoft Sentinel, Azure Monitor, Defender, and we should gather all those data at one place under log analytics maybe, and develop a regular test and incident response plan, and conduct periodic audits. So those things under governance and visibility will help us uh, preventive measures under preventive measures. Now, once we have everything in place, but you never know, still things can happen. So, what should we have? We should have detection and response strategies, monitoring and alerts. We must enable and customize security alerts in MS Defender to protect suspicious activities. We must use Azure Sentinel to aggregate logs and set up alerts for unusual activities. Uh, we must have something like file integrity monitoring to detect unauthorized changes to critical files. Then these fall under monitoring and alerts. We must have something for the anomaly detection, like behavioral analytics. We must use machine learning based behavioral analytics, which is there in Azure Sentinel, to detect deviations from the normal behavior patterns, which will help us protect it. And audit logs. We must regularly review audit logs for an unauthorized access attempts or changes in configurations. All right, so these things will help us detecting. How can we detect anything? If there is a proper surveillance in place, there is a proper monitoring and notifications are in place. How can we have that monitoring? With the multiple tools like Azure Monitor, Azure Sentinel, Defender, and all those conditions, we can apply alerts. And then finally, once we have those notifications and everything, how can we respond? The very first thing we must do, we must do the containment. How can we do that? By isolating affected resources and disabling those accounts immediately. immediately isolate the affected VMs or services from the network to prevent further spread. Uh, and these disable accounts I mentioned, you could also think like temporarily disable compromised accounts to prevent further unauthorized actions, right? Because you also want to get back on your feet as soon as possible. And right now, what is happening? There's a forensic happening, right? So first of all, just like police does that, they just create that yellow strips around. This is the affected area, and they do their forensic. So that's what we got to do: isolate the affected resources and disable the accounts. Then notify the incident, because there is a incident response team, IR team, incident response team activation. So what we know, what do you what do we mean by the activation? It simply notify the incident response team to assess the situation and begin recovery efforts, because we have already isolated, disabled. Now we are talking to our people. Go ahead and figure it out what's happening, how much damage is done, whether it is done or not, was it false, things like that, and execute a communication plan to inform stakeholders and manage external communications as well. Because it's not just about the technical folks. Ultimately, everybody is involved. Ultimately, it is a business, right? So we have to think big. Hence, there is an communication plan to inform everyone, which supposed to know those things like what is happening, right? Then you got to investigate forensic analysis. So you're going to perform forensic analysis on affected systems to identify the strains, the ransomware strain and point of entry. How big is the damage? We must review the Azure logs to trace the origin and propagation of the attack. So that's how we can apply the DR strategy, detection and response. All right. Now, finally, this is something very important where people usually get stuck. Was when it is compromised, how to get back to our feet as soon as possible. So these are a few points. Let's discuss them one by one. So assess the situation and identify the scope of attack. That's the first point. We must assess the situation and identify the scope of attack first, which means identify infected systems and data. We can do that by threat detection tools such as Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Sentinel, or any third-party security tool to determine which system files or backups have been compromised or encrypted by ransomware. So identify the infected system and data first, because only then you can recover once you know what all area is affected. Then create a list of all affected machine, file share, and system. Note down the specific ransomware strain to help guide the recovery process. Once we have this information, confirm the integrity of your backups by identifying versions of your data stored before the attack. Verify that the backups are unencrypted and free from ransomware, right? We can check all that in the isolated confined area. Then ensure the environment is clean. what what we mean by that is everything is happening in an isolated area. So because if you remember in the previous case, in the previous slide, we were talking about just isolate it. So keep compromised systems disconnected from the network to prevent the spread of ransomware. Consider using an isolated environment to recover and scan systems. Uh, Scan all affected systems using advanced threat detection solutions such as MS Defender or anti-malware tool or any third-party tool or anything that you have in place to which can perform a full system scans and give you the accurate reports. If systems are severely compromised or cannot be cleaned effectively, consider wiping and rebuilding them from known good images or backup snapshots. This ensures that the ransomware is completely removed. Then you should recover data from backups. Now, here is the tricky, because we need to select the clean backup version, right? You cannot simply go ahead and backup, the last backup that happened, because you never know, even that malware got backed up. So choose backup version that were created before the ransomware attack, because the forensic analysis that we're talking about can give you the information when exactly the attack happened. What was the entry point? What was the date? And you can just restore in a confined area and check it out again, scan it if you find any trace. If not, then you're good to go. If you have implemented that 3-2-1 backup rule, like 3 copies, 2 different media, and 1 offsite, then you are all set. But usually it's very expensive, and only those which has some kind of compliance regulations and a lot of critical application, only those people does that. So use your offsite or immutable backup as the restore point if you have the 3-to-1 backup rule. If your backups were immutable or stored in an isolated environment like Azure storage or Azure immutable storage, prioritize these for recovery as they are less likely to be affected by the ransomware. Restore critical systems and data in a segregated recovery environment to verify the integrity of the restored files before reconnecting them to the production environment. That's I've been talking from the very first. We started talking about recovery protocols. Then we need to rebuild and restore systems. For systems that were severely compromised, it may be necessary to rebuild them entirely. This involves reinstalling the operating system, application, and reconfiguring settings from clean installation media. As you restore systems, ensure that they are fully updated with latest security patches and configurations to prevent vulnerabilities from being exploited again. And of course, once the environment is clean, you can begin restoring data and applications from verified backups. Prioritizing restoring critical system first, such as databases, virtual machines, and essential business applications, so that you can minimize the downtime and get back to your business, minimize the as much as less reputation or any kind of damage because of that attack. Then verify and test the restored systems. This is most important, because after restoring systems and data, we must verify that all systems are functioning correctly. Test applications, network connectivity, and data integrity. Perform all security scans on restored systems to ensure no remnants of ransomware remains. Use monitoring tools like Sentinel or any other tools that you have to analyze logs and things like that. Now, once the systems are verified as clean and functional, gradually reintegrate from back up into the production environment. We must harden the security posture, take steps to prevent the future ransomware attacks by hardening security, and all those things that we keep on talking about in our previous slides, like enabling MFA, implementing least privilege, applying network segmentation, vulnerability scanning, regular patching, those things. And what we can do, we can definitely review and revise the backup strategies. Now, what we are doing, things are okay, but we are figuring it out how we can make sure like it will not impact us again. After recovery, test your backup procedures to ensure they are reliable and resilient against future ransomware attacks. This includes testing the restore process regularly. If you haven't already considered using immutable backups or backup solution that prevent data from being modified or deleted after it's been saved, you must. Ensure that your backup strategy follows the 3-2-1 rule that we talked about. We must have incident post-mortem and documentation for the future reference. Conduct a post-incident review and document the recovery process, which will be for the future reference, or for the people around you can get benefited from those things. And finally, learn and improve from your experience, which means continuous improvement. Let's talk about the continuous improvement. Well, the very first thing is regular security audits, which means conduct periodic security audits for of your environment to identify and rectify potential entry points or vulnerabilities. Carry out regular pen testing or VAPT to simulate attacks and test the effectiveness of your security measures that you have in place. Conduct regular training sessions with users so that they can identify what is phishing email, right? Or a social engineering attack, or other common ransomware delivery methods that we talked about in the first slide. We should run the incident response drills to ensure the team is prepared. That can fall under user training. So regular security audits, user training, and we must have a regular review and update security policy and procedures to adapt to emerging threats. And of course, integrate the feedback from post-incident reviews into policy updates so that we can keep on updating our policies as per the feedback and improvement suggestions or lesson learned, so that we must not encounter such situation again. So that's all. I hope it was interesting and you guys liked it. Well, thank you for watching, and you